WTC Weather Lab. Here's Eric's forecast.
Hope you had a wonderful Labor Day holiday weekend and were able to enjoy the sunshine. I saw some people at my apartment complex taking advantage of the pool today on the day off, and you'll have plenty of opportunities to try and jump in the pool and cool off over the coming days, as it looks like the summertime temperatures stick with us. We're talking maybe mid to upper 90s by the end of the week with plenty of sunshine and dry conditions. So definitely looks like the start of September is going to be on the hot side. Taking a look outside on the satellite and radar shows, we had mainly clear skies today. Just a few of those high, thin level clouds making their way across the area. We did have a few stray showers work through the lower portion of Acadiana down through St. Mary and lower St. Martin Parish earlier this afternoon, but all that activity has come to an end. Still a warm evening, but temperatures should eventually drop down into the low to mid 70s by tomorrow morning. Now, a little bit of that shower activity was associated with this low pressure system now making its way through the lower Gulf of Mexico. You can see a lot of convection fired up today, so it is getting a little better organized, now up to a 70% chance that it could possibly become a tropical depression over the next couple of days, but it looks like it's going to run out of time and eventually move into the east coast of Mexico, whether that's Wednesday or Thursday, as this still is a slow moving system, but thanks to an area high pressure, it should keep this down to the south, so no concerns for us. We're just going to see more sunshine. Over towards the east, it's all about Hurricane Dorian. Look at that impressive eye. Still 24 hours later, it has barely moved at that, and it has remained pretty much stationary over the last 12 hours or so. You can see the eye just wobbling a little bit, but not really moving to the west or east or even to the north at all. Has undergone a couple eye wall replacement cycles. That is what's causing it to maybe weaken slightly, but still a very powerful Category 4 storm battering the Grand Bahama Island, remaining for the better part off the Florida coast, with the worst of storm on the eastern side. And as we get this to turn to the north, hopefully we keep the worst of this off to the east and we just get some lesser effects for those along the east coast. Here's a look at the Doppler radar. You can see it's a very tight storm. The eye about 20 miles wide, but the winds only extend out about 45 miles. So it's a relatively small storm at that, mainly just battering the Bahama Islands, with just outer ring bands making their way into Florida throughout a good portion of our Monday. But most of those rains are now coming to an end, except for right along the Gulf Coast. That's where they're still seeing some of those outer bands move onshore this evening. Now here's a look at the latest information. 130 mile an hour winds with gusts up to around 160. As mentioned, it's still stationary, but at least according to the latest track, it should eventually begin to move to the north, and by about tomorrow afternoon, still off the east coast about 50 miles or so. So the worst of it, again, looks like it stays just off to our east. Winds, though, still up to around 125 miles per hour. So it's still going to be a Category 4 storm, eventually dropping down to a Category 3 with about 120 mile an hour winds as we head into Wednesday evening up near the Jacksonville area. Then it turns along the Gulf Coast, makes a close pass to the Carolinas, still as a Category 2 storm with winds above 100 miles per hour as we head into Thursday evening. It could eventually clip the Outer Banks region late Thursday into early Friday morning before making that turn out farther into the Atlantic and maybe heads towards the Nova Scotia area by this weekend as it begins to weaken down to just a tropical low at that point. But still going to be a long week ahead for all those up and down the East Coast. Now, as far as the impacts, what can they expect with Dorian? Well, here's a look at those wind fields. As I mentioned, it is a very tight storm. The red is where we're seeing hurricane force winds, the orange strong tropical storm, and then the yellow is the weak tropical storm winds of about 36 miles per hour up to about 50. Right now, all that continues to be offshore, just looking at some gusts making its way into the Florida Peninsula. Going into tomorrow, though, you do notice by about noon now, some of those weak tropical storm winds beginning to make their way up the east coast of Florida. That continues to stay and gets a little further inland up towards the Daytona Beach and Jacksonville through Wednesday afternoon. And then as we go closer towards Thursday, starting to see some of the orange make their way onshore along the Carolina coast between Charleston and Myrtle Beach. So now we're starting to talk winds 60, 70 miles per hour. This is because as the system begins to weaken, its wind field's going to spread out a little bit, allowing for some of those stronger winds to move onshore near the Carolinas. Continuing even into North Carolina, that's where some of the strongest winds could move farther inland than some of the areas along Florida. Now, with all that wind piling up along the coast, Storm surge looks like it's going to be an issue, but the numbers have come down a good bit from what we were expecting earlier. So now we're looking at maybe 3 to 6 feet right along the barrier islands or the coast of Florida near Orlando. Comes up a little bit and just to the north of Jacksonville as we get into the Georgia area. We're talking about 6 to 10 feet above level, and that does extend pretty far inland. Same thing as you get closer to the Savannah area. We're talking 6 to 10 feet of storm surge in some locations. So it definitely looks like storm surge will be the bigger issue as Dorian moves up the East Coast. We'll have high storm surge even into the Carolina coast before it begins the weekend as we get closer to Myrtle Beach and the Outer Banks as it begins the weekend as it gets closer to those areas. So because of that, hurricane warnings pretty much up and down the entire Florida coast with watches extending north of Jacksonville with tropical storm watches and warnings for the in portions of the areas along the coast. So a long week ahead for that. But there is some good news. We are seeing this big dip in the jet stream. That's a trough of dry air building down, and that should be our key to keep the storm off the East Coast and eventually get it to kick it and ride to the north and get out of the Bahamas. So that is the good news. And because of that drier air, we're just going to see more sunshine and hot temperatures in the days ahead. So a quiet night in store for us, 74. For that overnight low across much of Acadiana, and then tomorrow just wall-to-wall sunshine, and with that temperatures heating up. 94 degrees for that high in the afternoon, and then just continuing to get hotter through the rest of the week with plenty of sunshine. Could be pushing the mid to upper 90s. Good news is it does look like with that drier air, the humidity remains in check, so we're not talking dangerous heat indices, just going to be downright hot. Still need to make sure you're drinking the water if you work outside, but good news for all those farmers after the wet August. They finally can get back into the field, get that hay going along with the rice harvest.
All right, very good. Thanks, Eric. And still ahead tonight, a life or death test for a student pilot, what happened in the air and how he was able to get safely back on the ground. Plus, a rescue dog and its new high